I'm David, 47 years old, and my life is, well, let's just say it's a mixed bag. I work in cybersecurity, a field that's as thrilling as it is relentless. It's a game of cat and mouse with hackers and breaches, a constant battle to outthink the next attack. I've been at it for nearly 2 decades now, and while it's kept me sharp, it hasn't left much room for anything else. I'm single, not for lack of trying, but maybe because I've been married to my work for so long. My friends joke that I should consider dating an AI, since I seem more comfortable around algorithms than people. But hey, a man needs a sanity, and in my line of work, it's the small escapes that keep me grounded. Speaking of escapes, cycling is my sanctuary. There's something magical about hitting the road early in the morning. The city's still yawning and stretching itself awake. The world feels quieter then, simpler. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the pavement is the perfect counterbalance to the noise of firewalls, codes, and constant alerts. It's just me, my bike, and the horizon. And then there's the drinking with friends. Nothing wild, mind you. Just a group of middle-aged men swapping stories, teasing each other, and reminiscing about the good old days. It's a ritual that's as much about laughter as it is about unwinding. There's a local pub we've claimed as our own. Its dim lighting and creaky chairs somehow making the beers taste better. My life might not be the stuff of epic tales, but it's mine. Until recently, though, I would have said it's steady, predictable even. But that was before something happened that would shake up my carefully balanced routine. It started with a simple work task, something mundane, and it snowballed into something I could have never imagined. Let me tell you what happened. Work in cybersecurity isn't for the faint of heart. Some days, it feels like I'm a digital detective, sifting through lines of code and analyzing strange patterns to track down bad actors. Hackers, scammers, data thieves, you name it, I've encountered them all. It's a constant chess game, and you ever think 3 steps ahead or risk being checkmated. Most of the time, the attackers aren't Hollywood-style geniuses in dark rooms typing furiously. They're smart, sure, but they rely on exploiting human weaknesses as much as technical ones. Phishing emails are still a bread-and-butter tactic for scammers. You'd be amazed at how many people click on links promising free gift cards or urgent payment confirmations. My job is to design systems that spot these tricks before they reach their targets, or to clean up the mess when they do. Tracking cyber attackers is like peeling back layers of an onion, except every layer is encrypted. We use tools that monitor network traffic, flagging anything suspicious. Sometimes, it's as simple as noticing unusual login times or IP addresses coming from countries that have no business accessing a system. Other times, it's digging through logs and piecing together breadcrumbs left behind by an attack. A deleted file here, a strange script there, it's all part of the puzzle. Then there are the scammers. These are the people running elaborate schemes, from romance scams targeting lonely folks to massive fraud operations draining accounts. Catching them means following the money. Transactions leave trails, and even the best scammers can't hide forever if you know where to look. It's satisfying to shut these operations down, knowing you've saved someone from financial ruin. The more advanced hackers are a different breed. They use zero-day exploits, custom malware, and dark web networks to hide their activities. Those cases are my favorites. It's an adrenaline rush when you finally catch them slipping, finding the one vulnerability in their plan, and shutting them down. It's like being a hunter. Only my weapons are algorithms and firewalls. But it's not always glamorous. The work can be grueling, especially when an attack happens in real time. Everyone's scrambling to stop the bleeding, and you feel the weight of responsibility. A missed threat could mean millions in losses, or worse, personal data leaked. The stakes are high, and sometimes I wonder if I thrive on the pressure or if I'm just numb to it now. Even with all the stress, there's a weird satisfaction in knowing you're making the digital world a little safer. It's not perfect. I can't stop every scammer or hacker out there, but every victory feels like one small step toward keeping people's lives intact. Of course, not every case is a win, and not every attacker gets caught. Some just slip through the cracks, leaving behind a nagging frustration. It's those unresolved mysteries that stick with you, gnawing at the back of your mind. And lately, there's been one case in particular that's been keeping me up at night. Something about it feels off, like it's more than just another hack. But I'll get to that. There's a certain charm to the bachelor life, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. Freedom of action, no strings attached. It's a lifestyle that suits me. I can wake up whenever I want, go wherever the wind takes me, and spend my time exactly how I see fit. There's no one waiting at home to ask why I'm late, no long discussions about plans, and definitely no debates over whose turn it is to do the dishes. It's just me and the life I've built around my own rhythm. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against the idea of settling down. I just haven't found the right person, or maybe I've gotten too comfortable in my own bubble. There's something incredibly satisfying about being the master of your own time. If I want to go cycling at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, I can. If I want to crack open a beer and play an old album late into the night, no one's there to complain about the noise. It's my space, my rules. Work takes up a big chunk of my day, but outside of that, my time is my own. Some evenings, I'll call up a friend or two, and we'll head to our usual pub for a few drinks. Other times, I'll take my bike out and hit the trails, losing myself in the rhythm of the pedals and the hum of the tires on gravel. It's a simple pleasure, but it makes me feel alive. The best part? There's no need to justify my choices to anyone. If I want to spend a weekend binge-watching documentaries or take an impromptu road trip, I can. Sure, some people might call it selfish, but I think of it as self-care. Life is short, and I'd rather fill it with things that bring me joy than conform to someone else's idea of how it should be lived. That's not to say it's all roses. Sometimes, the quiet evenings can feel a little too quiet. And there are moments, usually when I see a couple laughing together or hear my married friends talk about their kids, that I wonder if I'm missing out. But then I remind myself that everyone's journey is different. For now, this is mine, and I'm okay with that. Freedom comes with its own responsibilities, of course. There's no one to share the load when things go sideways. If something breaks, I fix it. If the fridge is empty, I shop. It's all on me, but I don't mind. In a way, it's empowering. I've learned to rely on myself, and that's a skill I wouldn't trade for anything. All in all, I like the life I've carved out for myself. It's not perfect, but it's mine, and that's what matters. Besides, who knows what the future holds? Maybe someday I'll trade the bachelor life for something else. But for now, I'm just enjoying the ride. It started about a week ago. Those strange calls. At first, I didn't think much of it. Spam calls, maybe. Happens to everyone these days. But these were different. The phone would ring, always in the evening, usually when I was winding down with a drink or browsing through cycling gear online. When I answered, there wasn't a voice, no awkward telemarketer trying to sell me something. Just a faint rustling. Inaudible. It was as if someone was there but didn't know how or didn't want to speak. The first time, I chalked it up to a bad connection or a prank and hung up. But the calls kept coming. The pattern was odd. Never at the same time, but always after dark. And always the same strange, almost static-like rustling. I'd say hello a couple of times, louder with each repetition, and then hang up when no one responded. It wasn't frightening, not at first, just irritating. Who calls someone only to say nothing? After the third or fourth time, I started to get curious. I tried *69 to trace the number, but the call came up as unknown. No caller ID, no records in my phone log that I could pin down. I even mentioned it to a buddy at work, asking if anyone in our cybersecurity circles had been pulling a joke on me. He laughed it off, saying it sounded like a ghost call, a glitch in the phone system or a malfunction with the carrier. That explanation should have satisfied me, but something didn't sit right. The rustling wasn't just static. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed intentional, like someone trying to make me hear them without speaking. It had a rhythm, almost like faint breaths through the receiver. And sometimes, I thought I could hear something else in the background. Soft clicking sounds, like fingernails tapping against glass. By the end of the week, it was starting to get under my skin. The last call came just before midnight. I remember staring at the screen, debating whether to answer or let it ring out. Curiosity got the better of me, as it always does. "Hello," I said, sharper this time. The rustling was there, faint but unmistakable. And then, for the first time, something new, a whisper, so soft I couldn't make out the words. My breath hitched, and I froze, trying to listen harder. But before I could say anything else, the line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone, a chill running down my spine. This was no prank. At least, not the kind I'd ever experienced. I couldn't explain it, but for the first time I felt watched. Another week passed, and I started noticing a pattern. The calls weren't random anymore. They came at exactly 1 a.m. every single night. No earlier, no later. It was unsettling. The precision made it feel deliberate, as if someone had carefully chosen that specific moment. At first, I thought I was imagining the timing. I mean, who notices things like that? But the third night in a row, I stared at the clock as the minute hand clicked onto 1 a.m., and sure enough, the phone lit up and buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't answer. I let it ring out this time, watching the numberless screen until it stopped. But it didn't give me the relief I'd hoped for. Instead, I lay there heart racing, staring at the dark ceiling and wondering what kind of person or thing could be so meticulous. The next night, the same thing happened. 1 a.m. on the dot. This time, I grabbed the phone and answered. "Who the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice louder than intended. The same rustling, that faint, almost rhythmic noise. It wasn't static. I was sure of that now. I strained to hear anything more, but the line went dead, just like it always did. I started to lose sleep, dreading that nightly call. Even when I was exhausted, I'd wake up 5 minutes before 1 a.m., my body tense, waiting for the phone to buzz. And it always did. At work, I couldn't concentrate. I ran diagnostics on my phone, double-checked my carrier account for any sign of hacking, and even used some tools we had in cybersecurity to trace call origins. Nothing. The calls didn't leave a trace. No number, no data trail, nothing. It was as if they never happened, except for the fact that I knew they did. One night, determined to get some answers, I decided to record the call. I set up my laptop to capture audio from my phone and waited. 1 a.m. came, right on schedule, and the phone buzzed. I hit record and answered. "Say something," I urged, trying to keep my voice steady. If this is a joke, it's not funny anymore. The rustling started, soft and deliberate, like fabric being dragged over a microphone. Then a whisper, faint, indistinct, but definitely there. "David." My heart stopped. It was my name. Before I could respond, the call cut off. I stared at the phone, the room unnaturally silent around me. Slowly, I turned to the laptop and played back the recording. The rustling was there, clear as day. But the whisper, it wasn't. The recording didn't capture it. The absence of the whisper on the recording rattled me. It made the whole thing feel more personal, more sinister. I knew what I'd heard, but now I had no proof, not even to myself. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. Every keystroke felt sluggish, every email pointless. My colleagues noticed something was off. One of them, Greg, leaned over during lunch. "You okay, man? You've been zoning out a lot." I wanted to shrug it off, but I needed to talk to someone, even if it sounded ridiculous. "I've been getting these weird calls," I said. Always at the same time, late at night. Greg raised an eyebrow. "Prank calls?" "I don't think so. There's no number, no trace. Just rustling noises. And last night, I swear, I heard my name." He frowned, setting his sandwich down. "That's creepy. Have you checked your phone for malware or spyware? Someone could be messing with you, maybe using voice tech. I've tried everything, I admitted. Diagnostics, tracing software, nothing shows up. Greg looked thoughtful. Maybe it's someone trying to scare you? You ever piss anyone off? I almost laughed. In our line of work, every scammer and hacker we shut down probably hates me. He nodded, but his expression remained uneasy. Just be careful, man. Stuff like that can escalate. Maybe change your number. It wasn't a bad idea, but deep down, I doubted it would help. Whoever, or whatever, was calling me didn't seem bound by something as mundane as a phone number. That night, I decided to confront it head-on. I stayed up, sitting in the dark with my phone in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. At 12:59 a.m., I braced myself. When the clock hit 1 a.m., the phone lit up. No number, no caller ID. Just incoming call. I took a deep breath and answered. What do you want? I demanded. For a moment, there was only the rustling. Then, clearer than ever, a whisper. You left me. My blood turned cold. The voice was faint but familiar. It sounded like my brother. I hadn't thought about him in years. Not since he died. We hadn't been close in the months leading up to the accident. I'd been too busy with work, too wrapped up in my own life. The guilt had faded over time, or so I thought, but now it hit me like a freight train. This isn't real, I said, my voice trembling. You're not real. The whisper came again, slower this time. You left me. And then, for the first time, there was something new. A low, guttural laugh, echoing faintly, as if from far away. I dropped the phone. It hit the floor, the call still active. I stared at it, paralyzed. After a moment, the screen went dark. The call ended. I didn't sleep that night. The following morning, I couldn't shake the sound of that voice or the laughter. It wasn't just eerie. It was accusatory, like it was pulling me into something I wasn't ready to face. At work, I went through the motions, barely present in meetings or on calls. Greg noticed again. You look like hell, he said during a coffee break. I didn't bother pretending otherwise. The calls aren't stopping, I admitted. He gave me a long look. This is more than just some prank, isn't it? I nodded. Last night, I swear it sounded like my brother. Greg's eyes widened. Your brother? Didn't he? Yeah, I interrupted. He died. Years ago. But it's his voice. Or something pretending to be him. Greg hesitated, then leaned in closer. Look, I'm not the superstitious type, but if this is messing with your head, maybe talk to someone. A therapist, maybe a spiritual advisor. A spiritual advisor? I scoffed, but his concern was genuine. I'm just saying, man, sometimes things aren't all logic and code. The idea stuck with me. That evening, after staring at my phone for what felt like an eternity, I finally Googled local spiritual advisors. To my surprise, there were a few options nearby. One name stood out. Ms. Evelyn Byrne, a well-reviewed medium. I wasn't sure if I believed in that kind of thing, but at this point, I needed answers. I called her number. Ms. Byrne speaking. Came a calm, steady voice. Hi. I began awkwardly. I've been having some strange experiences. I'm not sure how to explain, but I need help. She didn't ask for details. Come by tomorrow afternoon, she said. Bring something personal to the person you believe is trying to reach you. The next day, I dug through a box I hadn't opened in years. Among old photos and letters, I found it. A watch my brother used to wear. It was scratched and worn, but it still worked. Holding it made my chest tighten, a wave of regret washing over me. When I arrived at Miss Byrne's modest office, the air inside was thick with incense. She was an older woman with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through me. Sit, she said, gesturing to a chair across from her. I handed her the watch, and her fingers lingered on it for a moment. "You've been receiving calls," she said without prompting. I nodded, stunned. "And the voice, it's someone you lost. Someone you feel you failed." My throat tightened. "My brother. We weren't on good terms when he died. I was busy with work, and I didn't—" She raised a hand, silencing me gently. Regret has a way of anchoring spirits. "But this," she held up the watch, "this feels different. There's anger here, but it's not entirely your brother's." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. She closed her eyes, gripping the watch tightly. "Something else is attached. Something using your guilt as a way in. It's feeding on your emotions, making itself stronger." The room felt colder. "What do I do?" I asked. She opened her eyes, locking them onto mine. "You'll need to confront it. But be warned, it won't let go easily. Tonight, when it calls, don't hang up. Stay on the line and face it." The thought sent a chill down my spine, but I nodded. That night, as 1 a.m. approached, I sat in my living room, the watch in one hand and my phone in the other. When the call came, I answered immediately. "Who are you?" I demanded. The rustling began, then the familiar whisper. "You left me." This time, I didn't waver. "What do you want?" The voice grew louder, more distorted. "Come, see." And then, before I could react, the phone burned hot in my hand and the room seemed to shift around me. The air grew heavy, the walls stretching into darkness. It felt like I was being pulled somewhere else entirely, somewhere I didn't want to go. The darkness thickened, swallowing the edges of the room until I couldn't tell where I was anymore. My living room had dissolved, replaced by a strange, empty void. The air felt oppressive, damp, and cold, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. And then, through the silence, I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and uneven, as though someone or something was limping toward me. My pulse pounded in my ears as I turned, trying to locate the source of the sound. "David," the voice rasped again, louder this time. It was distorted, hollow, yet unmistakably my brother's. A figure emerged from the void, barely illuminated by a dim, unnatural light that seemed to come from nowhere. My breath hitched. It looked like my brother, but wrong. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were empty sockets, dark and endless. His body seemed to shimmer, fading in and out like a glitching hologram. "You left me," he repeated, his voice carrying an edge of pain and fury. I stepped back instinctively, clutching the watch tighter in my hand. "No," I stammered. I didn't mean to. I didn't know." "You knew," he interrupted, his voice rising into a guttural roar. The air vibrated with the force of it, and the ground beneath me shifted as though it would give way. "You chose your work, your life, over me, and now you're free while I'm stuck." Tears welled up in my eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I've regretted it every day. If I could change it, I would." The figure stopped, tilting its head as though considering my words. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something softer in the void where his eyes should have been. But then his form twisted, elongating unnaturally. His voice deepened, blending into something far more sinister. "But you can't change it," the thing hissed. "And now, you'll join me." The ground cracked open beneath me, revealing a chasm filled with writhing shadows. I stumbled, nearly losing my footing as tendrils of darkness reached for my legs. My instincts screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. "Fight it," Miss Burns' voice echoed in my mind, steady and calm. Confront it? I gripped the watch tightly, focusing on the memories it carried, the good ones. Laughter, late-night talks, the times we were inseparable as kids. I let those memories fill me, pushing back the guilt and fear. "You're not my brother," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "You're something else," using his face to torment me. The figure froze, its head snapping toward me unnaturally. You think you can banish me with words, it snarled. No, I said, lifting the watch. But I can banish you with him. I hurled the watch into the chasm, and as it fell, a blinding light erupted from its surface. The shadows recoiled, and the figure let out an ear-piercing shriek, its form disintegrating into smoke. The chasm closed, and the oppressive air lifted, replaced by a calm, warm breeze. I blinked, and suddenly I was back in my living room. The phone lay on the floor, its screen cracked but silent. The watch was gone. I sat there for what felt like hours, catching my breath and letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. The call stopped after that night, and I never saw the figure again. But the experience left its mark, a reminder of the cost of unresolved guilt and the power of facing your demons, no matter how terrifying they may be. Life didn't immediately return to normal after that night. Even though the calls had stopped and the figure was gone, I felt a strange weight pressing on me in the days that followed. Sleep came fitfully, and when it did, my dreams were fragmented and restless, flickering images of my brother, the chasm, and the eerie void. I couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had left something behind. It wasn't in the room or the apartment, but inside me, a whispering doubt, a persistent question. Had I really banished whatever that thing was? Or had I simply delayed its return? I started digging into what I could. Miss Byrne had told me to confront it, and her advice had saved me. But I needed to know more about what I'd faced. Late nights found me poring over forums, obscure websites, and even old books on folklore and paranormal phenomena. Words like specter, doppelganger, and vengeful shade popped up, but nothing seemed to fit exactly. Whatever I'd faced was deeply personal, tied to my own past and regrets. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I stumbled across a passage in an old journal digitized online. It spoke of shadow memories, fragments of emotion and pain that linger after a traumatic death. They could take form, the journal claimed, feeding on the unresolved guilt of those left behind. That description hit me like a punch to the gut. If what I'd faced was a shadow memory, then it wasn't just something external. It had come from me. My guilt, my regret, had given it life. This realization didn't make me feel better. If anything, it unsettled me more. How could I be sure it wouldn't come back? One night, unable to bear the weight of my thoughts any longer, I decided to visit my brother's grave. It had been years since I'd gone, something I was ashamed to admit. But I knew I had to go, had to confront the source of my guilt in a different way. The cemetery was quiet, shrouded in mist and the soft glow of moonlight. I found his headstone easily, though the sight of his name carved into the granite still sent a pang through my chest. "I'm sorry," I said aloud, my voice breaking in the stillness. "I should have been there for you. I should have done more." The words spilled out of me, everything I'd been holding back for years. My anger at myself, my sorrow, my longing to see him again. By the time I was done, tears were streaming down my face, and my throat ached from the effort. For a moment, I thought I felt something, a soft breeze brushing against my cheek, like a comforting hand. Whether it was real or just my imagination, I didn't know, but it felt like forgiveness. After that night, the weight began to lift. Slowly, gradually, I found myself sleeping better, laughing more, and feeling less haunted by the past. I didn't stop thinking about my brother, but the memories of him became less painful, more about the good times we'd shared than the regrets. The phone never rang again at 1 a.m., and the oppressive presence that had lingered in my apartment was gone for good. Life moved forward, but I carried the lessons of that terrifying experience with me. I learned that guilt, if left unchecked, could grow into something monstrous. But I also learned that facing it, acknowledging it, accepting it, could set you free. And while I'd never forget the shadows that once loomed over me, I knew they no longer held any power. As the weeks passed, I found myself living with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The nightmares faded into normal dreams, and I no longer jumped at every creak of floorboards or rustling in the corners of the apartment. I even resumed some of my old hobbies, cycling, long walks through the city, and meeting friends for drinks on weekends. But the events of those dark days, of the figure that came to me through the phone, and the terror that had gripped my mind, never fully left me. I knew it had changed me in ways I couldn't entirely explain. There was a quiet awareness in my life now, a respect for the unseen and the power of memory and regret. One afternoon, about a month after the night at the cemetery, I was cycling through the park, my thoughts drifting between the wind in my face and the rhythmic sound of my wheels on the pavement. As I passed a familiar tree-lined path, I noticed something that caught my attention. A small, worn notebook lying on the ground, half buried in the grass. I pulled over, curiosity getting the best of me. It wasn't much, a simple leather-bound journal, a little frayed at the edges. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was a drawing of a man, his face shaded in dark lines. There was something vaguely familiar about it, but I couldn't quite place it. I flipped through more pages, and the sketches grew more erratic, more unsettling. There were images of shadows, of figures with twisted, elongated limbs. The last page was the most disturbing. A drawing of a face, half human, half something else, a hollow, empty expression staring back at me. It looked too real, too lifelike. A chill ran through me as I closed the notebook. I couldn't shake the feeling that the drawings in that book were linked to what had happened to me. Somehow, it felt like it was tied to that same presence I'd battled not long ago. Had someone else been through a similar experience? Or was this just another part of the twisted ripple effect my own guilt had set in motion? I couldn't just leave the notebook there. I tucked it into my bag, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe not. But I knew I had to find out more. Whatever this was, it had been left for me to find, and that meant it wasn't over yet. As I made my way home, I felt a familiar unease creeping back in. The phone calls had stopped, the figure was gone, but the past still had a way of haunting you, especially when you weren't looking. I couldn't ignore what was happening, and I couldn't pretend I was fully free of the shadow it had cast on my life. There was something deeper to this story, something I wasn't finished with yet. And I wasn't sure I was ready to face it again, but if I had to, I would. I had learned that much at least. The only way to confront the dark is to turn toward it, face it, and understand it. I just wasn't sure what would happen next. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the notebook was somehow connected to something bigger, something I hadn't fully grasped yet. I sat in my apartment, flipping through its pages, the eerie drawings staring back at me. Each one seemed to echo the fear I'd felt those weeks ago, the same terror that had made me question my sanity. The figure, the voice, the unsettling calm that had settled in my life afterward. They all felt like parts of a puzzle, but the pieces didn't fit together just yet. As I studied the notebook, a strange thought began to gnaw at me. What if this wasn't just a random find? What if it was meant for me to see? I didn't believe in coincidences, especially after everything that had happened. I could no longer dismiss this as a mere happenstance. I knew I had to investigate further, but something in my gut told me this was going to be different from anything I had experienced before. The phone calls, the strange visions, they were one thing. But this notebook? It felt like a message, one I wasn't sure I was ready to decode. I reached for my laptop, my fingers hovering above the keys. I couldn't help but type a query into the search engine. Drawings of strange figures and phone calls at night. It felt ridiculous, but to my surprise, the search returned some results. There were forum posts, articles, even personal accounts from people who claimed to have encountered similar experiences. Some called it psychic phenomena. Others referred to it as nightmare projections. But there was a common thread. Each person had felt that same sensation of being watched, of being drawn into something they couldn't escape. The account spoke of a presence, one that wasn't necessarily evil, but one that was insistent, persistent. It fed on your fear, your curiosity, and once it had you, it never really let go. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read further. Several posts mentioned a guidebook of sorts, an old text that people had found or had been left with, just like the notebook I now had in my possession. The descriptions of its contents were unsettling, to say the least. The drawings, they claimed, were like maps to something far darker, something far more dangerous. I couldn't help but think of the figure from the cemetery, the one who had shown me something that I hadn't fully understood. Was this connected? Was the notebook part of the same plan? I closed my laptop and stared at the notebook again, feeling its weight in my hands, as if it was no longer just paper and ink, but a link to something more profound, more terrifying. I needed answers, but the more I searched, the more I realized I didn't want to face whatever this was. The feeling of dread returned, creeping up my spine, but this time I didn't shy away. I couldn't afford to. I had to know what was going on, and what I had to do to stop it, if it could even be stopped. I glanced out the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars in the night. I thought of the woman I had met, the one who had warned me. She hadn't been the same since our encounter, but I hadn't seen her in weeks. Was she the key to all of this? Had she known something I didn't? The unanswered questions hung heavily in the air, and I realized that the notebook wasn't just a clue. It was a challenge. I had to face what it was trying to show me. The darkness, the unknown, whatever it was that had been following me. And if it was going to end, I was the one who had to end it. But I didn't know how. I closed my eyes, the weight of everything pressing in on me. Whatever happened next, I wasn't sure I was prepared for it. But I knew one thing. There was no turning back. I sat in the silence of my apartment, the air thick with tension. The clock on the wall ticked away, its rhythmic sound almost mocking in the stillness. My mind raced, torn between the need to understand what was happening and the instinct to turn away from the fear that gripped me. But I couldn't just walk away. Not now. Not after everything that had led me to this point. I reached for my phone, hesitated for a moment, and then dialed a number I had been avoiding for days. The line rang a few times before picking up. David? It was her voice, the woman from the cemetery. Her tone was soft, almost too calm for the urgency I felt. Yes, I need to talk to you, I said, my voice tight. There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost hear her taking a deep breath before she spoke again. I know what you're about to ask, and I'm not sure you're ready for the truth. Her words sent a chill through me, but I wasn't backing down now. I don't have a choice anymore. I need to know what this is. The notebook, the calls, the figure I saw. What's happening to me? Another pause, and then she spoke, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. What you're dealing with is ancient. It's not something you can just dismiss or pretend isn't real. The notebook you found is a map, David. A map to something that has been waiting, watching, for a long time. I felt my chest tighten, as if the air around me had grown heavier. A map? To what? To something that shouldn't be disturbed. The figure you saw, it's not just a hallucination or a dream. It's an entity. It feeds off fear, off the unknown. And now it's using you, using your curiosity and your fear, to open a door that shouldn't be opened. My heart pounded in my chest, the weight of her words sinking in. I had known something was off, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. And what am I supposed to do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You need to stop searching. Stop trying to understand it, she said, her tone firm. The more you dig, the more it will come for you. This isn't something you can control. It has its own plans, and it won't stop until it has what it wants. I was silent for a moment, processing her words. But I can't just let it happen. I have to know what it is. I have to stop it. You can't. You're already too deep. There's only one way out now. Her voice dropped even lower. You have to destroy the notebook. Burn it. Erase all traces of it before it consumes you completely. The gravity of her words hit me like a physical blow. Destroy the notebook? Could I even do that? I had already seen too much, learned too much. Could I really let go of the one thing that seemed to hold the answers? What if it's already too late? I asked, my voice shaking. Her response was slow, deliberate. It might be, but you still have a chance. Don't wait too long. The line went dead, and I was left staring at my phone, the silence pressing in around me like a weight I couldn't escape. I had no idea what she meant by too deep, but I could feel it now. The presence, the weight of something watching me, waiting. I wasn't sure how much time I had left, but every instinct in my body screamed at me to act, to destroy the notebook before it consumed me entirely. I stood up from my chair, my legs unsteady, as I walked over to the small table where the notebook lay. It sat there, innocuous enough, but I knew it wasn't just a book. It was a conduit, a link to something that shouldn't exist, something that wasn't meant to be in this world. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching out, as if the very space around me was shifting, reacting to the threat the notebook represented. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, feeling the cold, smooth cover beneath my touch. The drawings on the pages seemed to shift in the dim light, the figures moving, watching me. I had no idea what would happen if I destroyed it, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let it consume me. I looked around, my heart racing, my breath coming in shallow bursts. There was a matchbook on the counter from an old restaurant I hadn't used in months. I grabbed it, my hands shaking as I lit the match. The flame flickered in front of me, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. I stared at the notebook one last time. The door to the apartment slammed open. I turned sharply, the match almost going out in my surprise. But the room was empty. No one was there. My heart raced in my chest, my breathing quick and shallow. I looked back down at the notebook, my fingers tightening around the match. Burn it, I thought. I struck the match against the box and held it over the pages, the flickering flame licking at the edge of the first page. For a moment, nothing happened, and then whoosh. The flames caught, and the book was consumed. The room filled with the acrid smell of burning paper, and I stepped back, watching the book burn to ashes before my eyes. But as the last of the pages turned to ash, I heard a voice, low and chilling, echo in my mind. It's not over, David. You've only just begun. The room went cold, and I knew. Whatever I had done, it wasn't enough.